Welcome to the online course on the Nibbāna Sermons 23 to 33, hosted by the Numata Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Hamburg in collaboration with the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts. And today we will be looking at Sermon 27. But before that, a few of the comments from the discussion on the forum. Mikuni Dhammadinna. The Buddha's realization of conditionality, arising and cessation of conditionality, that is, of emptiness, comes with an intrinsic aspect of tolerance, based on a deep understanding of the nature of the mind, in the sense of the ability of placing oneself into the conditioned and dependently arisen shoes of others, and of being able to see and to see through their dogmas and clingings that lead to their own dukkha and despair. All these are only caused by the existential and emotional investment in categorically asserting sense data, mind sense data included, due to clinging and ignorance, thereby becoming subject to more dependency and more displacement and fear, and all the reactions that come with that. But the Buddha's compassionate understanding of and freedom from this predicament has allowed him to give others tools that enable one to step out of the magic show that one is so addicted to. And Kim Allen took up that thread and said, I would like to draw a link here to the opening of Digha Nikaya 1, which also gives an instance of the Buddha advocating tolerance. In this case, two wanderers of other sects are insulting and praising the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. The Buddha does not react and indeed admonishes the monks that they should not be angry, resentful, or upset if others speak in disparaging ways. What an amazing instruction in non-offense that we might wish were better followed in today's world. However, he does suggest that they calmly say what is true in order to correct any stated falsehood. And Robert Grosch then applied the same to Venerable Ñāṇananda's teachings. He says, I also find Venerable Ñāṇananda's sermons are radiating with benevolence and compassion. In order to help us to develop right view and to overcome doubt, he takes up these many obscure and difficult passages from the suttas. And besides setting their stage in the light of other sutta passages, he also elucidates them with his many similes, which at times are even so humorous that I have to chuckle despite the difficulty of the material. The simile of sending someone to Colombo who instead goes straight to the next tavern or heads off into the absolutely wrong direction to illustrate pamada and papancha comes to my mind, as well as this very description of the magic show. Here in Sermon 27 we'll get another of these similes, this time of two chess players. Kim Allen. I'm sitting with the image of the magic show, and in particular the wise person who sits to the side and sees through what is happening. She or he then looks out into the audience and sees how people are deceived. Although it has an element of humor, it is also quite poignant. And it brings up the very real question of how to live in the world if one no longer buys into it. There are questions about how to relate to people who are caught up in the magic, such as the friend that the wise person runs into after the show. Is it adequate to simply find language that is clever enough to satisfy a worldling while also staying true to the deeper understanding? Is there a skillful way to try to wake up those who do not yet see? some way that does not create a superior self for the wise one. I see and they don't. It seems that the Brahma Viharas become important as relational tools. But the compassion or kindness of a noble disciple might not look as it does for a worldling. Noble compassion has an element of dispassion. And Linda Grace commented on the image of missing the wood for the trees with dependent arising. I find this image of the synoptic view from here itself, taking into account the intervening spaces between the trees, to be very powerful in a practical way. The image of the spaces in between are, so to speak, actually what establishes the relationship between the links, both their arising and their ceasing. Fueled by ignorance, it's almost like they have an invisible magnetic pull, difficult to see, connecting any two conditions. This being, this comes to be. With the rising of this, this arises. The pull continuing on in a cascade of connected conditions, spinning round and round in a seemingly inexorably cycle of suffering. But with the development of wisdom, the magnetic pull can diminish, and the space in between can be an exit, where the causal connections can be weakened and eventually break. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, this ceases, where seeing the conditioned nature of experience is possible. And Robert Grosh took up this and said, "It became ever clearer to me that the real catch-22 of conditionality is found in these interlocking, self-enforcing feedback loops. That is to say, the whirlpools which spin out of their primary templates of the cycle within, between name and form, and the cycle without, between name and form and consciousness, which keep us trapped in samsara. This underlines that it is so important to see through the underlying principle of conditionality. Seeing through the very principle breaks all these vicious cycles with one strike. I find these passages a strong reminder of the liberating potential of the practice of bare awareness, which helps to slow down and ultimately bring to peace the whirlpools of conditionality." Then Linda Grace again. "This is a very minor point, but I was a bit surprised to hear Venerable Ñāṇananda say ignorance as a kind of influx is so powerful that even the keenest in wisdom cannot attain arahanthood all at once. The wheel of Dhamma has to turn 4 times, hence the fourfold distinction as stream winner, once returner, non-returner, and arahant. Of course, the Venerable points about the immense power of the influxes cannot be emphasized enough. And perhaps I'm just not fully understanding what he's saying about not being able to attain arahanthood all at once. Or perhaps due to the fact that these were oral lectures, the point isn't being made quite as clearly as it might have been in something written. After all, there are several examples in the suttas of disciples reaching one or another of the levels of awakening without necessarily going through all 4 individually. And then there's Barre, who features prominently in this sermon, who apparently was not even on the path, who realized full awakening all at once. Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda picks up on that same and says, "That passage had caught up my attention too. I thought that the Venerable Ñāṇananda was coming from the Theravada understanding that there are distinct mind moments for each of the 4 paths and fruits, 8 in total. In this scheme, even the quickest attainment of arahantship, as for example of going directly from worldling to non-returner, are represented or conceptualized as an ultra-quick sequence of 4 plus 4 being 8 mind moments for the 4 fruits and 4 paths." Yeah, that makes sense to my mind also, that this is based on the commentary understanding of mind moments, instead of on what we find in the suttas, where I don't see any clear-cut, explicit indication that even the path to arahantship involves like 4 different experience in sequence. So with this we are ready now to look at Sermon 27. Etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankara samato sabbu paripatinis saggo tanhakayo virago nirodho nibbānam. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction. With the permission of the Most Venerable Great Preceptor and the assembly of the Venerable Meditative Monks. And this is the 27th sermon in the series of sermons on Nibbāna. In our last sermon, we brought up some similes and illustrations to explain why the suchness of the Tathagata has been given special emphasis in the Kālaka Rama Sutta. Drawing inspiration from the Buddha's sermon, comparing consciousness to a magic show, we made an attempt to discover the secrets of a modern-day magic show from a hidden corner of the stage. The parable of the magic show revealed us the fact that the direct and indirect formulation of the law of dependent arising, known as tathata, suchness, or idappaccayata, specific conditionality, is similar to witnessing a magic show from two different points of view. That is to say, the deluded point of view of the spectator in the audience, and the discerning point of view of the wisdom-eyed critic hidden in a corner of the stage. The reason for the riddle-like outward appearance of the Kālaka Rama Sutta is the problem of resolving the conflict between these two points of view. However, the fact that the Tathagata resolved this conflict at a supramundane level and enjoyed the bliss of emancipation comes to light in the first three discourses of the Bodhibhagga in the Udana. These three discourses tell us that after the attainment of enlightenment, the Buddha spent the first week in the same seated posture under the Bodhi tree, and that on the last night of the week we reflected on the law of dependent arising in the direct order in the first watch of the night, in the reverse order in the second watch, and both in direct and reverse order in the last watch. These last mentioned reflection, both in direct and reverse order, is like a compromise between the deluded point of view and the discerning point of view mentioned above. Now, in a magic show, to see how the magic is performed is to get disenchanted with it, to make it fade away and cease, to free the mind from its spell. But seeing how a magician performs, one gets disgusted with what he performs. Similarly, seeing the arising of the six bases of sense contact is the way to get disenchanted with them, to make them fade away and cease, to transcend them and be emancipated. We come across two highly significant verses in the Sona Sutta among the sixes of the Anguttara Nikaya, with reference to the emancipation of the mind of an arahant. Nekkammang adhimuttassa pavivekancha chetaso abhyabhanja adhimuttassa upadana kayassa cha tanna kaya adhimuttassa assamohancha chetaso disva ayatan upadang sammachitang vimucchati. The mind of one who is fully attuned to renunciation and mental solitude, who is inclined towards harmlessness, ending of grasping, extirpation of craving, and non-delusion of mind, on seeing the arising of sense bases, is fully emancipated. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. If one is intent on renunciation and solitude of mind, if one is intent on non-affliction and the destruction of clinging, if one is intent on cravings, destruction, and non-confusion of mind, when one sees the sense bases arising, one's mind is completely liberated. And here the parallel from the Madhyama Agama. One who delights in dispassion, whose mind dwells in seclusion, delights in being without conflict, and rejoices in the cessation of clinging. One who also delights in the cessation of clinging and in imperturbability of the mind, on attaining true knowledge, through this his mind is liberated. And another parallel from the Samyukta Agama. One is determined on separation of the mind from sensual desires, and casting off and being without anger as well. Being determined on seclusion of the mind from lustful cravings forever and without remainder. Being determined on separation of the mind from clinging, and being without loss of mindfulness in the mind, fully understanding what manifests in the sensory fields, by that the mind is liberated. End of comment. To see how the sense bases arise is to be released in mind. Accordingly, we can understand how the magic consciousness of one who is enjoying a magic show comes to cease by comprehending it. Magic consciousness subsides. In other words, it is transformed into a non-manifestative consciousness, which no longer displays any magic. That is the mental transformation that occurred in the man who watched the magic show from a hidden corner of the stage. This gives us a clue to the cessation of consciousness in the Arahant and the consequent non-manifestative consciousness attributed to him. The Dvayatānupassana Sutta of the Sutta Nipāta also bears testimony to this fact. The title itself testifies to the question of duality forming the theme of this discourse. Throughout the sutta, we find a refrain-like distinction between the arising and the ceasing of various phenomena. It is like an illustration of the two aspects of the problem that confronted the Buddha. Now that we are concerned with the question of the cessation of consciousness, let us quote the relevant couplet of verses. Yang kinchi dukkhaṃ sambhoti sabbhaṃ viññāna pañcaya viññānassa nirodhena natthi dukkhassa sambhavo etaṃ ādīnavaṃ ñatva dukkhaṃ viññāna pañcaya viññānupasama bhikkhu niccāto parinibbuto. Whatever suffering that arises, all that is due to consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness, there is no arising of suffering. Knowing this peril, this suffering dependent on consciousness, by calming down consciousness, a monk is hungerless and fully appeased. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Whatever suffering originates is all conditioned by consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness, there is no origination of suffering. Having understood this danger, suffering is conditioned by consciousness. By the stilling of consciousness, a bhikkhu, hungerless, has attained Nibbāna. Yeah, I just wanted to add that this verse is a very powerful reply to an interpretation sometimes prevalent in some Buddhist cycles of giving emphasis to consciousness and even reifying consciousness, I would say, as like the Nibbāna experience being a particular type of consciousness. This is something found in some later tradition, but it's sometimes also attributed to the early teachings. And I think this verse that Venerable Ñāṇananda brought up is a very powerful reply. By identifying consciousness as the source of dukkha, there's not really much room left to reify consciousness as something that is in itself the final goal. End of comment. The comparison between the magic show and consciousness becomes more meaningful in the context of this discourse. As in the case of a magic show, the delusory character of the magic of consciousness is traceable to the perception of form. It is the perception of form which gives rise to the host of reckonings through craving, conceits, and views, which bring about a delusion. Comment. I'm not quite sure what to make of this statement. And I just wanted to present my own understanding. In my own understanding, the perception of form is not the only reason for craving conceits and views. The same can also happen with immaterial experiences, which are per definition based on having left behind the perception of form and the experience of resistance. Nevertheless, each of the immaterial attainments can still lead to craving, conceit, and views. In fact, they are included in the Brahmajalas, the first discourse of the Digha Nikaya, in the Brahmajalas survey of mistaken views. End of comment. Therefore, a monk intent on attaining Nibbāna has to get rid of the magical spell of the perception of form. The verse we recited from the Kalahavivada Sutta the other day has an allusion to this requirement. That verse, beginning with the words Na Sanya Sanyi, is an attempt to answer the question raised in the previous verse in that sutta, posing the query, Katang samitasa vibhoti rupang? To one constituted in which manner does form cease to exist? Let us remind ourselves of that verse. Na sanya sanyi, na visanya sanyi, nopiya sanyi, na vibhota sanyi, evang sametasa vibhoti rupang, sanya nidānai papancha sankha. He is not conscious of normal perception, nor is he unconscious. He is not devoid of perception, nor has he rescinded perception. It is to one thus constituted that form ceases to exist. For reckonings through prolificity have perception as their source. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Not percipient through perception, not percipient through disturbed perception, not altogether without perception, not percipient of what has vanished. Form vanishes for one who has so attained, for concepts due to proliferation are based on perception. End of comment. Here the last line states a crucial fact. Reckonings, designations, and the like, born of prolificity, are traceable to perception in the last analysis. That is to say, all that is due to perception. Another reason why a form has received special attention here is the fact that it is a precondition for contact. Comment again, I am not quite sure what to make of this, because contact can also arise just from name. Again, the immaterial spheres are a very good example. And I think that the verse from the Kalahavivada Sutta, as I believe I stated when we discussed it in an earlier sermon, and the interpretation that to my mind makes more sense is to assume that the reference just to form, rupa, rupe, is an abbreviation due to metrical reasons, and that we should read nama rupa into these references to rupa. End of comment. When there is form, there is the notion of resistance. That is already implicit in the question that comes in a verse at the beginning of the Kalahavivada Sutta. Kisming vibhote napusanti passa. When what is not there, do touches not touch? The answer to that query is Rupe vibhote napusanti passa. When form is not there, touches do not touch. We come across a phrase relevant to this point in the Samgiti Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, that is Sanidassanang Sapattigang Rupang. Materiality, according to this phrase, has two characteristics. It has the quality of manifesting itself, Sanidassana. It also offers resistance, Sapattiga. Comment, the translation by Walsh of the relevant phrase has visible and resisting. And then he uses invisible and resisting for Anidasana Sapatigang Rupam. And to my mind, this is a more straightforward translation. I find the idea of saying that materiality has the quality of manifesting itself not quite straightforward. It kind of almost imputes some degree of agency into materiality, which I don't see is there. And I assume that the Venerable Ñāṇananda is forced to adopt this translation because he keeps using non-manifestative for the Anidassana Vijnana. But to my mind, again, the translation by Kohn that I mentioned when we discussed that verse of Sanidassana, Anidassana as visible and invisible is just more straightforward, and this qualification of Rupa clearly shows that this is the obvious meaning. And once we see that the reference to Pabhang, Sabatu Pabhang in that verse from Kevada Sutta, probably originally was Sabatu Pahang, and thus the consciousness described is something to let go of. Then to speak of consciousness as invisible and boundless is simply a qualification of consciousness, of normal consciousness. And then the whole question of a non-manifestative consciousness is really a little bit besides the point. This does not mean, of course, the consciousness of an arahant is free of any kind of reactivity. But I don't think that the Kevada Sutta sense gives sufficient basis for positing a non-manifestative consciousness, Anidassana Vijnana, in the way this is sometimes being done here by Venerable Ñāṇananda. But again, this is just my take, and whatever you may think of the Kevada Sutta passage, I think when it comes to this Sanidassanang or Anidassanang Rupang here, visible or invisible is considerably more straightforward than manifestative or non-manifestative. Materiality does not manifest itself. It just is visible or not visible, or either is resistance or not resisting. End of comment. Both these aspects are hinted at in a verse from the Jata Sutta we had quoted at the very beginning of this series of sermons. Yata namancha rupancha asesang uparujyati patikang rupa sanyacha ettasa chichate jata. The Jata Sutta tells us the place where the tangle within and the tangle without, Antojata, Bahijata, of this gigantic samsaric puzzle is solved. And here's the answer. Wherein name and form, as well as resistance and the perception of form, are completely cut off. It is there that the tangle gets snapped. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Where name and form ceases, stops without remainder, and also impingement and perception of form. It is here this tangle is cut. End of comment. The phrase Patigang Rupa Sanyacha is particularly significant. Not only the term Patiga, implying resistance, but also the term Rupa Sanya deserves our attention, as it is suggestive of the connection between form and perception. It is perception that brings an image of form. Perception is the source of various reckonings and destinations. The term Sanya has connotations of a mark, a sign, or token, as we have already pointed out. It is as if a party going through a forest is blazing a trail for their return by marking notches on the trees with an X. The notion of permanence is therefore implicit in the term Sanya. Comment. Yeah, the connotations of Sanya as a mark, sign, or token is recognized in the Pali English dictionary as one of the meanings, but all the references given are to related text, Jataka Pali. In my personal reading, I often do not recall an occasion where in the suttas, Sanya has that meaning. To my mind, therefore, Sanya rather stands for perception, and it is Nimitta, which stands for mark, sign, or token. And so I offer as additional reading for this lecture my article on Nimitta in the Encyclopedia of Buddhism. And I think as far as the early discourses are concerned, it is more representative of the general sense of the term to see sanya as that which takes up a nimitta, which processes a nimitta, but it is the nimitta which is the mark, sign, or token, which is, end of comment. So it is this sanya that gives rise to papancha sankha, reckonings through prolificity. The compound term papancha sanya sankha, occurring in the Madhupindika Sutta, is suggestive of this connection between sanya and sankha. Reckonings, definitions, and designations arising from prolific perception are collectively termed papancha sanya sankha. The significance attached to sanya could easily be guessed by the following dictum in the Guhattaka Sutta of the Sutta Nipata. Sanyang pariññā vitareya ogam, comprehend perception and cross the flood. Full comprehension of the nature of perception enables one to cross the four great floods of defilements in samsara. In other words, the penetrative understanding of perception is the way to deliverance. Let us now go a little deeper into the connotations of the term sanya. In the sense of sign or token, it has to have something to signify or symbolize. Otherwise, there is no possibility of designation. A sign can be significant only if there is something to signify. This is a statement that might need a lot of reflection before it is granted. A sign, properly so called, is something that signifies, and when there is nothing to signify, it ceases to be a sign. So also in the case with a symbol. This is a norm which is well explained in the Mahavedalla Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. In the course of a dialogue between Venerable Mahakottita and Venerable Sariputta, we find in that sutta the following pronouncement made by Venerable Sariputta. Rago koa voso kinchano, doso kinchano, moho kinchano. Te kina savasa bhikkhuno pahina unchinna mula tala vatantukata anabhavakata ayatinganupada dhamma. Lust, friend, is something. Hate is something. Delusion is something. They have been abandoned in an influx-free monk, uprooted, made like a palm tree, deprived of its sight, made extinct and rendered incapable of sprouting again. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Lust is a something, hate is a something, delusion is a something. In a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed, these are abandoned, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, done away with, so they are no longer subject to future rising. End of comment. So lust is a something, hate is a something, delusion is a something. Now a sign is significant and a symbol is symbolic, only when there is something. Another statement that occurs a little later in the dialogue offers us a clarification. Rago ko avuso nimitta karano, doso nimitta karano, moho nimitta karano. Lust, friend, is significative, hate is significative, delusion is significative. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Lust is a maker of signs, hate is a maker of signs, delusion is a maker of signs. In a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed, these are abundant, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, done away with, so that they are no longer subject to future rising. End of comment. Now we can well infer that it is only so long as there are things like lust, hate, and delusion that signs are significant. In other words, why the Tathagata declared that there is no essence in the magic show of consciousness is because there is nothing in him that signs or symbols can signify or symbolize. What are these things? Lust, hate, and delusion. That is why the term akinchana, literally thingless, is an epithet for the Arahant. He is thingless not because he no longer has the worldly possessions of a layman, but because the aforesaid things, lust, hate, and delusion, are extinct in him. For the Tathagata, the magic show of consciousness has nothing substantial in it, because there was nothing in him to make things significant. That man with discernment who watched the magic show from a hidden corner of the stage found it to be hollow and meaningless, since he had, in a limited and relative sense, got rid of attachment, aversion, and delusion. That is to say, after discovering the tricks of the magician, he lost the early impulses to laugh, cry, and fear. Now he has no curiosity, since the delusion is no more. At least temporarily, ignorance has gone down in the light of understanding. According to this norm, we can infer that signs become significant due to greed, hate, and delusion in our minds. Perceptions ponder to these emotive tendencies. The concluding verse of the Mahagandhiya Sutta of the Sutta Nipata is particularly important, in that it sums up the Arahant's detachment regarding perceptions and his release through wisdom. Sanya viratasana santi gantha, panya vimotasana santi moha, sanyancha dittincha ye aggahe song te gattayanta vicharanti loke. To one detached from precepts, there are no bonds. To one released through wisdom, there are no delusions. Those who hold on to percepts and views go about wrangling in this world. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. For one detached from perceptions, there are no knots. For one liberated by wisdom, there are no delusions. But those who have grasped perceptions and views wander in the world, creating friction. End of comment. It is this state of detachment from perceptions and release through wisdom that is summed up by the phrase Anāsavang Cetu Vimutting Panya Vimutting in some discourses. With reference to the Arahant, it is said that he has realized by himself, through higher knowledge in this very life, that influx-free deliverance of the mind and deliverance through wisdom. Anāsavang Cetu Vimutting Panya Vimutting Dittiva Dhamme Sainga Vinya Sanchikatva. So we could well infer that the Arahant is free from the enticing bonds of perceptions and the deceptive tricks of consciousness. It is this unshakable stability that finds expression in the epithet anecho, immovable, and tito, stable, used with reference to the Arahant. The Anenjasappaya Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya opens with the following exhortation by the Buddha. Anicca bhikkhave kama ducca musa mosa dhamma maya katang etang bhikkhave bala lapanam yencha ditta dhammika kama yencha samparayika kama yancha ditta dhammika kama sanya yancha samparayika kama sanya obhayang etang maradheyang mara sesa visayo mara sesa nivapo mara sesa gocharo. Impermanent monks are sense pleasures. They are empty, false, and deceptive by nature. They are conjurers' tricks, monks. Tricks that make fools prattle. Whatever pleasures there are in this world, whatever pleasures there are in the other world, whatever pleasurable percepts there are in this world, whatever pleasurable percepts there are in the other world, they are all within the realm of Mara. They are the domain of Mara, the bait of Mara, the beat of Mara. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Because sensual pleasures are impermanent, hollow, false, deceptive. They are illusory, the prattle of fools. Sensual pleasures here and now, and sensual pleasures in lives to come. Sensual perceptions here and now, and sensual perceptions in lives to come. Both alike are Mara's realm, Mara's domain, Mara's bait, Mara's hunting ground. Yeah, I find the translation of Kama Sanya as sensual perceptions preferable to pleasurable perceptions, because there can be pleasurable perceptions that are not related to sensuality, and these are not being criticized or problematized in the passage. Then the corresponding passage from the Madhyama Agama. Sensual pleasures are impermanent, unreal, false, of a false nature, being indeed illusory, deceptive, and foolish. Sensual pleasures now and future, material forms now and future, all these are the domain of Mara. They are indeed Mara's bait. End of comment. This exhortation accords well with what was said above regarding the magic show. It clearly gives the impression that there is the possibility of attaining a state of mind in which those signs are no longer significant. The comparison of consciousness to a magic show has deeper implications. The insinuation is that one has to comprehend perception for what it is, in order to become dispassionate towards it. Sanyang parinya vitareya ogang. Comprehend perception and cross the flood. When perception is understood inside out, disenchantment sets in as a matter of course, since delusion is no more. Three kinds of deliverances are mentioned in connection with the Arahants, namely Animitta, the signless, Appanihita, the undirected, and Sunyata, the void. We spoke of signs being significant. Now, where there is no signification, when one does not give any significance to signs, one does not direct one's mind to anything. Panidhi means direction of the mind and aspiration. In the absence of any aspiration, there is nothing essential in existence. There is a certain interconnection between the three deliverances. Animitta, the signless, is that stage in which the mind refuses to take a sign or catch a theme in anything. Where lust, hate, and delusion are not there to give any significance, signs become ineffective. Comment, just in order to avoid misunderstanding, I think the Venerable is meaning this not to imply that Arahants do not employ any more signs. I mean, even for the Buddha, when he goes begging, he has to, his sanya, his perception has to use signs so he knows whether he gets food or not. When he gives a talk, he has to be able to take up the sign whether the monastics are there or not in order to know whether it's time to give a talk or not. I think the Venerable Ñāṇananda just means the particular sense of a sign being like invested with significance, taken serious through lust, hate, and delusion. End of comment. That is the signless. Where there is no tendency to take in signs, there is no aspiration, expectation, or direction of the mind. It is as if dejection in regard to the magic show has given rise to disenchantment and dispassion. When the mind is not directed to the magic show, it ceases to exist. It is only when the mind is continually there, directed towards the magic show or a film show, that they exist for a spectator. One finds oneself born into a world of magic only when one sees something substantial in it. A magic world is made up only when there is an incentive to exist in it. Deeper reflection on this simile of the magic show would fully expose the interior of the magical illusion of consciousness. Where there is no grasping at signs, there is no direction or expectation, in the absence of which existence ceases to appear substantial. That is why the three terms signless, animitta, undirected, appanihita, and void, sunyata, are used with reference to an arahant. These three terms come up in a different guise in a discourse on Nibbāna we had discussed earlier. They occur as appatittang, appavattang, and annāramanang. Appatittang means unestablished. Mind gets established when there is desire or aspiration, panidhi. Contemplation on the suffering aspect, dukkhanupassana, eliminates desire, so the mind is unestablished. Contemplation on not-self, anattanupassana, does away with the notion of substantiality, seeing nothing piti or essential in existence. Pith is something that endures. A tree that has pith has something durable. though it leaves may drop off. Such notions of durability lose their hold on the Arahant's mind. The contemplation of impermanence, anicca-nupassana, ushers in the signless, animitta, state of the mind that takes no object, annāramanam. The simile of the magic show throws light on all these aspects of deliverance. Owing to this detachment from perception, sanya viratta, and release through wisdom, panya vimutta, an arahant's point of view is totally different from the worldling's point of view. What appears as real for the worldling is unreal in the estimation of the arahant. There is such a wide gap between the two viewpoints. This fact comes to light in the two kinds of reflections mentioned in the Dvayatanupassana Sutta of the Sutta Nipata. Yang bhikkhave sadevakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmani apajaya sadeva manusaya idang satchanti upanijjaitam tarang aryanang itang musati yatha bodhang samapanyaya sudditang ayang ekānupassana. Yang bhikkhave sadevakassa lokassa samarakassa sabrahmakassa sassamana brahmani apajaya sadeva manusaya idang musati upanijjayitam tadang aryanang etang satchanti yatha bhotang samapanyaya suddhintang ayang dutiyanupassana. Monks whatsoever in the world with its gods, maras and brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses, brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is pondered over as truth, that by the Aryans has been well discerned with right wisdom as it is as untruth. This is one mode of reflection. Monks whatsoever in the world with its gods, maras and brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses, brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is pondered over as untruth, that by the Aryans has been well discerned with right wisdom as it is as truth. This is the second mode of reflection. Comment. The translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. In this world, because with its devas, maras and brahman, among this population with its ascetics and brahmins, its devas and humans, that which is regarded as this is true, the noble ones have seen it well with correct wisdom, thus this is false. This is one contemplation. In this world with its devas, humans, that which is regarded as this is false, the noble ones have seen it well with correct wisdom, thus this is true. This is the second contemplation. Yeah, I wonder if this passage could not be captured by rendering satya here as real and unreal rather than true and false. The term satya can carry both meanings, and in certain contexts, like I think for example the Four Noble Truths, the sense of truth is, in my view, the more prominent. But in other occasions, it can also refer to something that is real or unreal. And I wonder whether this would apply to this verse from the Dvayatanupassana Sutta. End of comment. From this, one can well imagine what a great difference, what a contrast exists between the two standpoints. The same idea is expressed in the verses that follow, some of which we had cited earlier too. Anatani attamaning passa lokang sadevakang nivittang nama rupasming idang satchanti manyati. Yena hi manyanti tatotang hoti anyata tang hi tassa musavati mosa dhammang hi ittarang. Amosa dhammang nibbānang tad arya satchato vidu. Teve satchavi samaya niccata parinibbuta. Just see the world with all its gods, fancying a self where none exists. Entrenched in name and form, it holds the conceit that this is real. In whatever way they imagine, thereby it turns out otherwise. That itself is the falsity of this puerile deceptive thing. Nibbāna is unfalsifying in its nature, that they understood as the truth. And indeed, by the higher understanding of that truth, they have become hungerless and fully appeased. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Behold the world together with its devas, conceiving a self in what is non-self. Settled upon name and form, they conceive this is true. In whatever way they conceive it, it turns out otherwise. That indeed is its falsity, for the transient is of a false nature. Nibbāna is of a non-false nature, that the noble ones know as truth. Through the breakthrough to truth, hungerless, they are fully quenched. End of comment. Let us go for a homely illustration to familiarize ourselves with the facts we have related so far. Two friends are seen drawing something together on a board with two kinds of paints. Let us have a closer look. They are painting a chessboard. Now the board is checkered. Some throwaway chunks of wood are also painted for the pieces. So the board and pieces are ready. Though they are the best of friends and amicably painted the chessboard, the game of chess demands two sides, the principle of duality. They give in to the demand and confront each other in a playful mood. A hazy idea of victory and defeat, another duality, hovers above them. But they are playing the game just for fun, to while away the time. Though it is for fun, there is a competition. Though there is a competition, it is fun. While the chess game is in progress, a happy-go-lucky benefactor comes by and offers a handsome prize for the prospective winner to enliven the game. From now onwards, it is not just for fun or to while away the time that the two friends are playing chess. Now that the prospect of a prize has aroused greed in them, the innocuous game becomes a tussle for a prize. Worthless pieces dazzle with the prospect of a prize. But just then there comes a pervert killjoy, who shows a threatening weapon and adds a new rule to the game. The winner will get the prize, all right, but the loser he will kill with his deadly weapon. So what is the position now? The sportive spirit is gone. It is now a struggle for dear life. The two friends are now eyeing each other as an enemy. It is no longer a game, but a miserable struggle to escape death. We do not know how exactly the game ended, but let us hold the post-mortem all the same. We saw how those worthless chunks of wood, picked up to serve as pieces on the chessboard, received special recognition once they took on the paint. They represented two sides. With the prospect of a prize, they got animated in the course of the game, due to cravings, conceits, and views in the minds of the two players. Those impulses were so overwhelming that, especially after the death knell sounded, the whole chessboard became the world for these two friends. Their entire attention was on the board, a life and death struggle. But this is only one aspect of our illustration. The world, in fact, is a chessboard where an unending chess game goes on. Let us look at the other aspect. Now, for the other hand, the whole world appears like a chessboard. That is why the Arahant Adhimotta, when the bandits caught him while passing through a forest and got ready to kill him, uttered the following instructive verse, which we had quoted earlier too. Tinna katta samanglokang yadapanyaya passati mamattang so asangvindang na dimitina suchiti. When one sees with wisdom this world as comparable to grass and twigs, not finding anything worthwhile holding on to his mind, one does not grieve, saying, "Oh, I have nothing." Comment translation by Norman. When by wisdom one sees the world as being like grass and wood, not finding possessiveness, thinking it is not mine, he does not grieve. End of comment. Venerable Adhimotta's fearless challenge to the bandit chief was extraordinary. You may kill me if you like, but the position is this. When one sees with wisdom the entire world, the world of the five aggregates, as comparable to grass and twigs, one does not experience any egoism, and therefore does not grieve the loss of one's life. Some verses uttered by the Buddha deepen our understanding of the Arahant standpoint. The following verse of the Dhammapada, for instance, highlights the conflict between victory and defeat. Jayang verang passavati, dukkang seti parajito, upasanto sukhang seti hitva jaya parajayang. Victory breeds hatred. In sorrow lies the defeated. The one serene is ever at peace, giving up victory and defeat. Common translation by Norman. Being victorious, one produces enmity. The conquered one sleeps unhappily. The one at peace, giving up victory and defeat, sleeps happily. End of comment. As in the chess game, the idea of winning gives rise to hatred. The loser in the game has sorrow at his lot. But the arahant is at peace, giving up victory and defeat. Isn't it enough for him to give up victory? Why is it said that he gives up both victory and defeat? These two go as a pair. This recognition of duality as a distinctive feature of this Dhamma. It gives in a nutshell the essence of this Dhamma. The idea of a duality is traceable to the vortex between consciousness and name and form. The same idea comes up in the following verse of the Attadanda Sutta in the Sutta Nipata. Yassa nanti idang meti paresang vapi kinchanang mamattang so asangmindang nanti metina sochati. He who has nothing to call this is mine, not even something to recognize as theirs, finding no egoism within himself, he grieves not crying, "Oh, I have nothing." Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. One for whom nothing is taken as this is mine or this belongs to others, not finding anything to be taken as mine, does not sorrow, thinking it is not mine. End of comment. So far in this series of sermons on Nibbāna, we were trying to explain what sort of a state Nibbāna is. We had to do so because there has been quite a lot of confusion and controversy regarding Nibbāna as the aim of the spiritual endeavor in Buddhism. The situation today is no better. Many of those who aspire to Nibbāna today aim not at the cessation of existence, but at some form of quasi-existence as a surrogate Nibbāna. If the aiming is wrong, will the arrow reach the target? Our attempt so far has been to clarify and highlight this target, which we call Nibbāna. If we have been successful in this attempt, the task before us now is to adumbrate the salient features of the path of practice. Up to now, we have been administering a purgative to dispel some deep-rooted wrong notions. If it has worked, it is time now for the elixir. In the foregoing sermons, we had occasion to bring up a number of key terms in the suttas, which have been more or less relegated into the limbo and rarely come up in serious Dhamma discussions. We have highlighted such key terms as sunyata, dvayata, tatata, attammayata, idabhajayata, papancha, and manjana. We have also discussed some aspects of their significance. But in doing so, our main concern was the dispelling of some misconceptions about Nibbāna as the goal. The aim of this series of sermons, however, is not the satisfying of some curiosity at an academic level. It is to pave the way for an attainment of this goal by rediscovering the intrinsic qualities of this Dhamma that is well proclaimed, svagdhatum, visible here and now, sanditthiko, timeless, sakkaliko, inviting one to come and see, ehipassiko, leading one onwards, sopanayiko, and realizable personally by the wise, paccattam viditabbo vinyuhi. So the few sermons that will follow might well be an elixir to the minds of those meditators striving hard day and night to realize Nibbāna. Lobo doso chamocha purisang papa chetasang hingsanti atta sambhutang tacha sarang va sampalang. Greed, hate, and delusion too, sprung from within, work harm on him, of evil wit as does its fruit, on the reed for which the bark is pith. Common translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Greed, hatred, and delusion, arisen from within oneself, injure the person of evil mind, as its own fruit destroys the reed. End of comment. The main idea behind this verse is that the three defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion, spring up from within, that they are atta sambhuta, self-begotten. What is the provocation for such a statement? It is generally believed that greed, hatred, and delusion originate from external signs. The magic show and the chess game have shown us how signs become significant. They become significant because they find something within that they can signify and symbolize. Now, this is where the question of radical reflection, yoniso manasikara, comes in. What the Buddha brings up in this particular context is the relevance of that radical reflection as a prerequisite for treading the path. The worldling thinks that greed, hatred, and delusion arise due to external signs. The Buddha points out that they arise from within an individual and destroy him, as in the case of the fruit of a reed or bamboo. It is this same question of radical reflection that came up earlier in the course of our discussion of the Madhu Pindika Sutta, based on the following deep and winding statement: Chakuncha vusa paticca rupecha upanjati chakku viññānam tinnang sangati passo passa paccaya vedana yang videti tang sanjanati yang sanjanati tang vitakkheti yang vitakketi tang papancheti yang papancheti tatunidanang purisang papancha sanya sanka samudacharanti atita nagata pacchupannesu chakku viññeyesu rupesu. Dependent on iron forms, friend, arises eye consciousness. The concurrence of the three is contact. Because of contact feeling, what one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one reasons about. What one reasons about, one proliferates. What one proliferates, owing to that, reckonings born of prolific perceptions overwhelm him in regard to forms cognizable by the eye, relating to the past, the future, and the present. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Dependent on the iron forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation beset a man with respect to past, future, and present forms, cognizable to the eye. Enter Madhyama Agama parallel. Whenever, friends, independence on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The coming together of these three things is contact. Independence on contact, there is feeling. If there is feeling, there is perception. If there is perception, there is intention. If there is intention, there is thought. If there is thought, there is differentiation. A monk, having gone forth to train in the path with such a corresponding reflection as the cause, with intention and perception, practices not desiring past, future, and present phenomena, not rejoicing in them, not becoming attached to them, and not dwelling on them. End of comment. Eye consciousness, for instance, arises depending on eye and forms. The concurrence of these three is called contact. Depending on this contact arises feeling. What one feels, one perceives, and what one perceives, one reasons about. The reasoning about leads to a proliferation that brings about an obsession, as a result of which the reckonings born of prolific perceptions overwhelm the individual concerned. And the process is somewhat similar to the destruction of the reed by its own fruit. It shows how non-radical reflection comes about. Radical reflection is undermined when proliferation takes over. The true source, the matrix, is ignored. With the result, an obsession follows, tantamount to an entanglement within and without, antojata bahijata. The paramount importance of radical reflection is reflected by the Suchiloma Sutta found in the Sutta Nipātan, as well as in the Sagarika Vagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. The Yakka Suchiloma poses some questions to the Buddha in the following verse. Rago cha doso cha kutoni dana, arati rati lomahangsa kutuja, kuto samutaya manovitakka kumaraka vankami vasajanti. Lust and hate, whence caused are they? Whence spring dislike, delight, and terror? Whence arising do thoughts disperse like children leaving their mother's lap? Common translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. What is the source of lust and hatred? Where are born discontent, delight, and hair-raising terror? Having originated from what do the mind's thoughts toss one around as boys toss up a crow? End of comment. The Buddha answers those questions in 3 verses. Rago cha doso cha ito nidana, arati rati lomahangso ito ja, ito samotaya manovitakka kumaraka vankame vasajanti. Sneha ja anta sambhuta nigrodasiva khandaja, putu visatta kamesu malovava vivata vitatavane. Yenang pajanante yatonidanang tenang vinodente sono yakka. Te duttarang ogang imang tarante atinna pobbang anupobbabaya. It is hence that lust and hate are caused, hence spring dislike, delight, and terror. Arising hence do thoughts disperse, like children leaving their mother's lap. Moisture-born and self-begotten, like the banyans, trunk-born runners, they cleave to diverse objects of sense, like the Malova creeper entwining the forest. And they that know where from it springs, they dispel it. Listen, O Yakka. They cross this flood so hard to cross, never crossed before, to become no more. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Lust and hatred have their source here. From this are born discontent, delight, and hair-raising terror. Having originated from this, the mind's thoughts toss one around as boys toss up a crow. Born from affection, arisen from oneself, like the trunk-borne shoots of the banyan tree, manifold attached to sensual pleasures, like a Malava creeper stretched across the wood. Those who understand their source, they dispel it. Listen, O Yakka. They cross this flood so hard to cross, uncrossed before, for no renewed existence. End of comment. In explaining these verses, we are forced to depart from the commentarial trend. The point of controversy is the phrase Kumaraka Dhankangi Vasajanti, recognized by the commentary as the last line of Suchiloma's verse. We adopted the variant reading Kumaraka Vankangi Vasajanti, found in some editions. Let us first try to understand how the commentary interprets this verse. Its interpretation centers around the word Dhanka, which means a crow. In order to explain how thoughts disperse, it alludes to a game among village lads, in which they tie the leg of a crow with a long string and let it fly away, so that it is forced to come back and fall at their feet. The commentary rather arbitrarily breaks up the compound term manovitakka in trying to explain that evil thoughts, vitakka, destruct the mind, mano. If the variant reading Kumaraka Vankami Vasajanti is adopted, the element V in Vankami Vasajanti could be taken as a hiatus filler, agama, and then we have the meaningful phrase Kumaraka Ankang if Vasajanti, even as children leave the lap. Lust and hate, delight and terror spring from within. Even so are thoughts in the mind, manovitakka. We take it as one word, whereas the commentary breaks it up into 2 words. It is queer to find the same commentator analyzing this compound differently in another context. In explaining the term manovitakka, occurring in the Kumma Sutta of the Devata Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. The commentary says, Mano vitaketi manamhi uppanna vitakke. Mano vitaka, this means thoughts arisen in the mind. The commentator was forced to contradict himself in the present context because he wanted to justify the awkward simile of the game he himself had introduced. The simile of leaving the mother's lap, on the other hand, would make more sense, particularly in the light of the second verse uttered by the Buddha. Snehaja atta sambhuta nigorda seva kandaja puttu visatta kamesu malavavi va vitatavane. The verse enshrines a deep idea. Sneha is a word which has such meanings as moisture and affection. In the simile of the banyan tree, the trunk-borne runners are born of moisture, they are self-begotten. Thoughts in the mind cleave to diverse external objects. Just as the runners of a banyan tree, once they take root, would even conceal the main trunk, which gave them birth, so the thoughts in the mind, attached to external objects of sense, would conceal their true source and origin. Non-radical effraction could easily come in. The runners are moisture-born and self-begotten from the point of view of the original banyan tree. The main trunk gets overshadowed by its own runners. The next simile has similar connotations. The Malava creeper is a plant parasite. When some bird drops a seed of a Malava creeper into a fork of a tree, after some time a creeper comes up. As time goes on, it overspreads the tree, which gave it nourishment. Both similes illustrate the nature of non-radical reflection. Conceptual proliferation obscures the true source, namely the psychological mainsprings of defilements. Our interpretation of children leaving the mother's lap would be meaningful in the context of the two terms snehaja, born of affection, and atta sambhuta, self-begotten. There is possibly a pun on the word sneha. Children are affection-born and self-begotten from a mother's point of view. Comment. Yeah, I think Venerable Ñāṇananda has established a strong case for his reading. The snehaja, atta sambhuta, and also the division of manovittaka. And I also personally find the idea of this game with the crow not fully convincing. This might happen a few times, but not really continuously. Crows are actually highly intelligent. And I don't think they would stupidly keep flying up again and again once they know that they're going to be pulled down again and again. In fact, we have this other simile of illustrating mindfulness of the body, where there's 6 animals bound together. One of them is a bird. And then when they are bound to a strong post, they pull a few times and then they stop pulling and just sit or lie down beside the post. So if we apply that simile, we would also expect the crow, after flying up a few times, to stop flying up because it knows that there's a string there. So I don't see how that simile really illustrates the point made by the rest of the verse. And in support of Venerable Ñāṇananda's interpretation, we may also refer to the Chinese parallel and Sanskrit quote in the Yogacara Bhumi. And both do not mention a crow, but have the imagery of a mother or a wet nurse, which kind of goes in line with the suggestion by Venerable Ñāṇananda on following the variant reading. End of comment. The basic theme running through these verses is the origin and source of things. The commentator's simile of the crow could ill afford to accommodate all the nuances of these pregnant terms. It distracts one from the main theme of these verses. The question asked concerned the origin, kuto nidana, kuto ja, kuto samuttaya, and the answers are in full accord, ito nidana, ito ja, ito samuttaya. With reference to thoughts in the mind, the term snehaja could even mean born of craving, and atta sambhuta conveys their origination from within. As in the case of the runners of the banyan tree and the Malava creeper, those defiling thoughts arisen from within, once they get attached to sense objects outside, obscure their true source. The result is the pursuit of a mirage, spurred on by non-radical reflection. The last verse is of immense importance. It says, "But those who know from where all these mental states arise are able to dispel them. It is they who successfully cross this flood, so hard to cross, and are freed from re-becoming." Thank you for your attention.